Hello and welcome to my final presentation regarding my math game. So, the game that I chose was called Fence Me In, and the standards that I'll be touching on involve problem solving and operations, including multiplication. So, the game. This was a really fun game. The game involves rolling a pair of dice and using the numbers on the dice to calculate an area and draw it on a grid. Players take turns and rolling the dice. They take turns rolling the dice and marking spaces on the grid until there is no more room to make squares. Once the grid is completely filled up, or a player has two consecutive turns in which they cannot draw a rectangle or draw a space, the game is over and the shapes are counted up to determine a winner. As an added challenge, we tried to fill up the grid with triangles, right triangles, instead of squares. I had the student attempt to calculate the area for most of their triangles, but I let a few tiny triangles slide as there was no room to calculate. We were surprised to find how much more difficult it was to 1. Draw the triangles, and 2. Conserve space on the grid to maximize gameplay. The standards met during this game include 8.0.0.2, which is add, subtract, multiply, and divide rational numbers using strategies or procedures. 6 through 8.ma.p, which is learners can analyze information and formulate a flexible, systematic plan to problem solve authentic situations and reflect on the reasonableness of the solution, making revisions when necessary. So, in this game, although we weren't able to make revisions, they did have to systematically plan where they were going to be putting their shapes because they wanted to conserve as much space as possible so that we wouldn't run out of turns. And finally, perform single transformations to a figure on the coordinate plane and determine whether the figures are congruent or similar. So we did discuss congruency and similarity. A lot of our shapes were similar. They had similar, the 3x4 was similar to the 5x4, but they weren't congruent. And we did discuss that a little bit. We talked about those words. So what went well? This was a really great session. I made the game more about getting as many squares as possible rather than necessarily solving for every single square. It made the whole process much more engaging. When we tackled the larger shapes, we successfully applied the concept of area, and it was encouraging to see the learner was already comfortable with multiplication facts needed for the game. We also discussed which squares were the same size and the word for that. Congruent versus not the same size. Versus not the same size. So congruent versus not congruent. What didn't go as well. So a little bit of background on my student. I work at a special needs school, so my student does have a learning disability. So they're maybe a little bit behind their classmates, but there was a mild struggle with the area of triangles. My modeling, while helpful in the moment, didn't lead to independent problem solving yet. The learner could only solve the equations that I had just recently solved, which tells me that they can copy the immediate steps, but they don't have a grasp on the formula or they can't quite retrieve it on their own yet. The learner needs some more practice with multi-step equations like this, with multiplication and division. And to avoid frustration with this learner, I did not push this topic. And in the future, what I might do differently, in the directions of the game, it states that players had the choice between perimeter and area, but we both stuck with area the entire game. If I did this game again, I might challenge the players of the game to alternate between area and perimeter. In both versions of this game, rectangles and right triangles, this would be challenging. As with the triangle version, they would need to use the Pythagorean theorem. And also in both versions, they'd have to use fractions for side lengths. So especially those rectangles, they'd have to use halves and they'd have to draw on the half grid for those odd numbered rolls. So anyway, that is my math game. Thank you for watching.